Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review. John Frusciante, PBX Funicular Intaglio Zone. John Frusciante is a guitar player, multi-instrumentalist, producer, and a studio musician who has collaborated with many great artists, contributed to their projects. Everyone from the Mars Volta to Wu-Tang, Johnny Cash, George Clinton. The guy has a pretty long rap sheet, but I know him best through his work with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And though he was separated from the band for a time due to some pretty intense drug addiction, he contributed to some of the band's most seminal work and helped them progress their sound with albums like Stadium Arcadium. However, I am a relatively new listener when it comes to his solo material, which I wasn't all that familiar with until maybe just a few years ago when some of the viewers of my show, as I was mentioning that I am into progressive rock music, that I am into psychedelic music, oh, are you into John Frusciante? Have you tried his stuff? And, you know, being suggested albums like the Empyrean and Curtains, I was pretty impressed by the great guitar playing, the passionate vocals, the progressive song structures as well. And I really liked this dude's adventurous nature when it came to what I was hearing outside of these albums as well. It just seemed like John Frusciante was pretty versatile, creating music on his own that is not only fooling with synthesizer pop and alternative rock, but progressive rock as well, psychedelic rock, ambient music as well. So in a way, it's no surprise that John Frusciante would be dropping kind of an electronic music album with this new LP, which he teased toward with the Letter Leffer EP, which had everything on it from synthesizer pop to arpeggiated synthesizer odysseys, breakbeats, rap verses from some impressive guest rappers. The EP was pretty short but chock full of ideas and flavors with kind of a rough recording on it. It just had kind of an unpredictable personality. I didn't know completely what to make of it. I just knew that the possibility of all these sounds coming together here was pretty interesting. I gotta be honest, I feel like something went horribly wrong in the process of doing this kind of stuff short style on the EP to bringing it to a full length, because this album has added up to one of the most uniquely unpleasant listening experiences I've had this year. Keep in mind, before I get into this LP, I want to say I don't think John Frusciante is just naturally bad at electronic music. I mean, he's put out electronic style music before, especially that collaborative LP he has out with Josh Klinghoffer, A Sphere in the Heart of Silence. So despite the electronic experience, this for me is really just kind of coming out of left field. Overall, I have to say this album sounds exactly like what I would imagine to be demos that Trent Reznor made before the Pretty Hate Machine, like before he even musically knew what he was doing. I mean, the sounds of this LP overall are just very, very demo quality. The sounds are crummy. And not that I'm afraid of lo-fi albums or lo-fi music or anything like that, but what bugs me the most is that all the influences, all the various sounds on this album that wouldn't normally be together on a track all seem to be piled on top of one another really haphazardly. The guitar tones all seem really kind of thin, maybe unequalized, maybe less equalized than they should be. The vocals, for the most part, are all buried track after track. And for the most part, they're not even performed well. John Frusciante gives some of the most ridiculous vocal performances of his entire career on this album. Moments where he's doing falsettos that are barely holding on to pitch. Moments where he's screaming and just going, I mean, literally, moments on this album, I was laughing at what he was doing with his voice. I don't know if he meant it to be comical. A lot of the synth tones on this LP are very bland, very generic, and the breakbeats that he throws in one track after another are just really run-of-the-mill, could have picked them up anywhere, and he doesn't even really treat them in such a way where they have an interesting timbre or anything like that. Occasionally they will be sped up, maybe some distortion will be thrown on them, but really overall boring, boring breakbeats. Breakbeats have not been edgy since like the mid to late 90s. And not that I think John is trying to be overly edgy. I do think he's trying to be somewhat experimental on this LP though. And maybe it's experimental for him, you know, this is certainly new ground for John, but in general, this is not really opening my eyes to any kind of brand new concepts or anything like that. I mean, certainly this album is experimental in the sense that everything was just kind of thrown together in a sense to just kind of see what happened with absolutely no effort or refinement or afterthought. And though I do think some artists and albums, bands can totally do that and come out ahead, this to me doesn't really, you know, even scratch the surface of what something wondrously experimental, jaw-droppingly experimental could be. I mean, there are spots where I feel like a tune to a song or just a melody can be nice, but the performance, the vocals are flat, the sounds surrounding this song are so awful that I can't even stand it. The track Hearsay has all these like acid bass lines that to me sound like John just learned to make bass lines like this the day before he made this track. And the vocals he sings throughout the song are just barely on pitch. The track Bike has all these free jazz, like drum solos going all over the place. That's kind of invigorating. But over that, you've got these really sour synth chords that aren't even interesting in the least. Some break beats come in later, and throughout this whole mess, John is just singing with some of the goofiest vocals. The track Guitar sounded like somebody's dubstep demo on SoundCloud with some wonky guitar soloing over it, which I did kind of find semi-interesting. And the beginning of the track Mistakes was really catchy, but toward the end when John is screaming, it just sounds terrible. Again, kind of like a really awful Nine Inch Nails demo. Just because something doesn't sound pleasing at first doesn't mean it's really deep or experimental. Again, there are a few moments that I find somewhat appealing, or I think could be appealing if they were just rethought, groomed just a little bit, but to me, listening to this album and trying to find things that I like is like, I don't know, picking through a field full of like bloody corpses trying to find survivors, and you know, the stench of dead bodies is just like bothering me so much, I don't even want to try to sift through it. Certainly I think some fans will be entertained by hearing John kind of indulgently give his creative side the shock treatment, really kind of jumpstart that random side of his personality, but for me, this just was not interesting at all. I'm feeling a really like a light to decent 2 on this album, but if you've given it a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And what should I review next? Anthony Fantano, John Frusciante, forever.